Zobriaissa se signotuledus.
Melisandre, the Red Woman, can be the only GOT character to appear in House of the Dragon. The grandeur of Game of Thrones might have come to a sorry end with a disappointing final season, but the name Melisandre, aka the Red Woman, will still ring a bell with the fans for being one of the most impactful characters till the very end. The mysterious Fire Priestess was introduced quite early in the show, and she had a memorable role to play in the narrative that followed. She influenced some major turning points and twists, and more importantly, her alluring presence set the screen on fire time and time again. While the prequel to GOT, House of the Dragon, is premised almost 200 years before the events of the show, Melisandre is potentially the only character who can appear because of her supernatural origins and the fact that she existed for hundreds of years prior to the events of GOT. In this video, we will bring you everything there is to know about the Red Woman and how she can make an appearance in the highly applauded House of the Dragon. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
The king has taken for his sigil the fiery heart of the Lord of Light.
The humble background of the character who shaped major events in Game of Thrones. It isn't a dramatic story of rags to riches, but the evolution of Melisandre is no less than a fairy tale. She was born in Ashe, which was located in eastern Essos, and her mother was a slave who raised her in utter poverty. Her journey to become the Red Priestess, who worshipped Lord of Light, is relatively mysterious, but it is believed that she earned certain magical abilities through her years of devotion. Much of her powers are probably derived from her special necklace, which glows when she performs such magic. When the kingdoms were busy in the bloody conflict of the Five Kings, Melisandre had already crossed the Narrow Sea and arrived in the court of Stannis Baratheon in Dragonstone. The family soon converted to her religion after being influenced by her confident and persuasive words, and she vowed to put Stannis on the Iron Throne following the death of his brother Robert. She believed in an ancient prophecy, and according to her, Stannis was the man mentioned there.
For the night is dark and full of terrors.
She was a religious fanatic for a major part of the show. While her alluring presence on the show was great for TRPs and made it incredibly tough to hate her, Melisandre was by no means portrayed as a positive character in the earlier parts of the show. In fact, in Season 2, you could see her performing certain religious rituals that made people question her righteousness. One famous scene was when she was burning statues of the Seven, who were widely worshipped in the land of Westeros, as a part of one of her rituals. Her creepy catchphrase, "The night is dark and full of terrors," and her deep eyes staring into the fire with the coldest expression that you can imagine, made the fans fearful of her presence. However, from her earliest days, she kept predicting that the world would be faced with a threat, the magnitude of which people cannot comprehend yet. She was probably among the first ones to give us clues about the Night King and the army of the dead who attacked the living towards the end of Game of Thrones. She enjoyed complete support of Stannis, who, despite being a brave and gallant warrior, was completely blinded by her rich promises. Her magical antics, such as producing flaming swords out of nowhere, and her short but impactful speeches also earned her the following of the soldiers and subjects under Stannis' command. If there was one person who wasn't so sure of her drastic methods, it was Davos, Stannis' trusted general. However, Stannis was not alone in the quest for the Iron Throne. His brother Renly Baratheon also saw himself as the rightful king, and it all culminated in the obvious: a background for a battle between the brothers. Renly commanded a strong army, and the odds were evenly stacked between the two brothers. But just as the fans were expecting a bloodied battlefield, Melisandre stepped in with her magic. She makes love to Stannis and magically gives birth to a demonic entity on the same night. This shadow-like creature stabs Renly in the heart in his own camp, even as the King's Guard watches helplessly. The war is won without any further casualties, and it strengthened his path to the Iron Throne. By now, it had been clearly established that Melisandre was capable of certain supernatural things, and her backing, it seemed, would eventually win the Iron Throne for Stannis.
The battle is over. We have won.
Battle of the Blackwater was a major setback. The Iron Throne was under the rule of Robert's son Joffrey, and he wasn't a strong character who could inspire his army. Just when it seemed that defeat was certain if Stannis attacked with full force, Tyrion Lannister stepped in with his cunning plans. Tyrion was Joffrey's uncle, and even though everyone underestimated him for being a dwarf, his master plan of using wildfire in the battle won them the war. Stannis was defeated, but he managed to retreat alive while a large part of his army was butchered in the war. This defeat actually increased the insane fanaticism that we have been seeing from Melisandre. She started offering human sacrifices for the Lord of Light, and anyone who showed signs of dissent was burned alive. However, it was also made pretty clear that if she was present during the events of the battle in the Blackwater Bay, the outcome could have been different. She could have stopped Stannis' fleet from being burned to ashes, and she started to look for answers elsewhere. Her journey introduced her to the likes of Gendry, King Robert's bastard son, and she performed yet another bizarre ritual when she stripped him naked, tied him to a bed, and used leeches to drain some of his blood. Once again, in the middle of all the madness around, she kept reminding everyone that the real threat was merely hiding in all this chaos, and it was far greater than the conflict between kings for the throne.
Are you a virgin?
Her eventful meeting with Jon Snow. It was when she accompanied Stannis to the north to protect the wall from the wildling attack that she first got introduced to Jon Snow. He was the bastard son of Ned Stark, one of Robert's primary allies, although his real identity would be revealed much later. Stannis' army saved the wall from the wildling attack, helping the Night's Watch, where Jon Snow served as a soldier. She oversaw the proceedings when Mance Rayder, the king of the wildlings, was burned alive for refusing to bend the knee to Stannis. Her early interactions with Jon Snow suggested that she knew far too much about this silent hero and how his journey would be shaped going ahead. One of the worst moments in the life of Melisandre came sometime after this, when she convinced Stannis to sacrifice his own daughter Shireen for the greater good. This was an event that broke the values of his army because they realized that the man they idolized and fought for was too blinded by some witches and promises of something to come. This is probably reflected in the final moments of Stannis, when his army suffers a terrible loss while attempting to win back Castle Winterfell from Ramsay Bolton, one of the most cunning characters in the show. He was wounded in the battle, and eventually, Renly's Kingsguard puts an end to his misery. All the promises, all the rituals and sacrifices finally never mattered, and it turned out that Stannis was probably not the chosen one in the first place. However, her tryst with Jon Snow continued even after the death of Stannis. She famously revived him after he was killed by some mutineers in Castle Black, and this actually shaped the events of Game of Thrones that followed. She started to back Jon Snow in his future endeavors, and somehow started to believe that he might be the prophesied savior. When Jon Snow got to know about her crimes of burning a little girl as a part of her ritual, he banished her from the north, pushing her into a long exile.
Kesir dreže žorelax. Skoro so gemele brozie?
Melisandros Evrosix.
A meeting with Daenerys Targaryen. Shortly after being exiled by Jon Snow, Melisandre came to know about this brave female warrior who had royalty in her blood. She had freed thousands of slaves from their troubles, and from having nothing after her ancestors were killed, she managed to have a massive army by her side. Besides, she also managed to raise 3 full-grown dragons, something that was unheard of for centuries. Yes, we are of course talking about the Dragon Queen Daenerys Targaryen, and from whatever we mentioned, you can imagine why she would be a lucrative character for Melisandre as the potential chosen one by the Lord of Fire. She meets her at Dragonstone, and even though one of her key advisors, Varys, is doubtful of Melisandre because of his hatred for dark magic, the Dragon Queen welcomes her. Her translator and best friend Missandei informed her that the promised prince could also be a princess, because the original text of the prophecy lacked any gender-defined terminology. Melisandre informs Daenerys about Jon Snow and advises her to meet him because he would have a key role to play in the upcoming battle. While Tyrion Lannister, who by this time is also one of the advisors of the Dragon Queen, is surprised by the verdict, he believes that Jon Snow could be a valuable ally, and he is summoned to Dragonstone. By now, Jon Snow has seen far too much to know about the threat posed by the White Walkers, and he knew that he would need powerful allies by his side to fight them. Hence, he answered the summon in affirmative and sailed for Dragonstone with Davos, who has now become one of his trusted aides. This is when we get to see a different side of Melisandre. She believes that her days of meddling with the affairs of kings and queens are over, and she heads for Volantis after putting together a formidable alliance between two of the most powerful people in Westeros. The fans are now starting to think that Melisandre is a changed woman, and her days of ruthless rituals and unnecessary sacrifices are behind her. Her valuable contribution in fighting the army of the dead. In the final season of Game of Thrones, she played a key role in determining the course of the battle in the fight of the living against the dead. When the cold winds made it almost impossible to light up a fire in the line of defense, she used her magical chants to accomplish the same. She caused the swords of the Dothraki to be lit up in flames as they charged the army of the dead. Of course, this proved to be a rather brief flicker of hope because the Dothraki army was slaughtered in seconds. She inspired Arya to slaughter the Night King in the final events of the war, and in all practicality, she actually helped the living win the war against a far more superior army of the dead led by the Night King. Overall, Melisandre was a character who evoked various emotions through the seasons of Game of Thrones. We grew from disliking her and finding her presence creepy to appreciating her more as she changed from her ruthless ways. She was called a witch, a priestess, a heartless religious fanatic, but it was eventually her who saved the day, and it is no surprise that she is one of the most important characters in the show in terms of impact. Now that House of the Dragon is finally here, the fans cannot be blamed for expecting that this character will be revived in some capacity so that we get to see her early life prior to the events of Game of Thrones. A prophecy that might have a deep undertone for House of the Dragon. If you have watched Game of Thrones or gone through the books of George R.R. Martin, you are probably familiar with the prophecy about the prince that was promised. According to the religion that prays to the Lord of Light, this is about a prophesied savior who would come to be a crucial cog in the fight against impending darkness. He would apparently pull out a flaming sword called the Lightbringer, and this prophecy was originally written in High Valyrian. Now this language is gender neutral, and hence the original text did not have the word prince, and it could well be a lady as well. This prompted Melisandre to consider the possibility that Daenerys could be the prophesied savior. And this also brings us to the situation in House of the Dragon. There are some powerful female characters like Rhaenyra Targaryen, and there could be a story arc where a younger Melisandre is looking for her promised savior. This not only brings out a very good reason to introduce her later in the show, it also makes things interesting by adding a touch of religion, politics, and supernatural forces. It will be the string to tie the two shows together, and we could get further insights about how the prophecy came together in the first place. The character of Melisandre was shrouded in mystery for the larger part of Game of Thrones, and this might be a nice opportunity to take a closer look at her origin stories. However, before we jump the gun, let us analyze the realistic chances of that happening in the show. What are the chances of seeing Melisandre in House of the Dragon? If we have to be realistic instead of being optimistic, so far there is nothing to suggest the appearance of Melisandre in House of the Dragon. In fact, the actress who played the role in Game of Thrones, Carice Van Houten, confirmed recently that all the speculations can wait until next season because she hasn't been approached so far for the role. She has revealed in an interview that she is eager to reprise her role if the opportunity presents itself, and she would love to see a new side to her character. Although she is not appearing in the first season of House of the Dragon, in all probability, The chances of her making a comeback in the later seasons certainly cannot be ruled out. We have already discussed the ways that leave a scope for her character to reappear, and it would be a heartening moment for the Game of Thrones fans if that does happen. Do let us know in the comments below about your thoughts regarding Melisandre returning as the mysterious fire priestess in the future seasons of House of the Dragon. We have learned that in showbiz, there is no such thing as impossible. And given the multiple story arcs that can reintroduce her, the fans have every reason to be optimistic about her future appearance in the show. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.
The king has taken for his sigil the fiery heart of the Lord of Light.
Ah,